Good evening, everyone. I think we'll get started here. Thank you all for coming to the Understanding Racial Injustice speaker series presented by We Charity MN and the Sari Youth Group of the Indian Association of Minnesota. My name is Sandhya Ratnam, and I will be the moderator for today's event. Taking into consideration recent events, as allies, our organizations believe it is important to educate our local community members about racial injustices amongst the Black and African American communities. The Sari Youth Group, which stands for South Asians Against Racial Injustice, was created to find ways to engage our community to inform, educate, engage, and advocate for social and racial change in our society. Our purpose with this series of sessions is to educate ourselves on topics such as the civil rights movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, covert and institutional racism, and ultimately on how to become an effective ally for all Black lives. This is the fourth and final event of our four-part speaker series, and our topic today is allyship and how white individuals and non-Black POC individuals can support the BLM movement. Our guest speakers tonight are Dieu and Jala Kurundi. If you would like to ask a question to either speaker for the Q&A session at the end, please do so using the link in the chat. And with that, let's get started with the first talk of the night. Our first esteemed speaker is Dieu. Yu is a rising senior at Hamline University studying political science, criminology, criminal justice, and social justice. Yu is fiercely passionate about civic engagement, social change, and creating pathways for historically underrepresented communities into local, state, and federal government systems. In these last few years, she has served in various roles in policymaking and community organizing. She currently serves as a co-founder of the Future Leaders of Local American Government Fellowship, as well as a board member for several organizations, including Girls on the Run Twin Cities and Women for Political Change. In 2020, Yu was named an innovator through the Young Women's Initiative of the Women's Foundation of Minnesota. She's excited to dedicate her life's work to activating the next generation of political leaders for our local, state, and federal levels of government through grassroots leadership and civic engagement. Upon graduation, she plans on pursuing law school and becoming a civil rights attorney while serving as an elected official for the state of Minnesota. Without further ado, here's Dieu.
Thank you so much, Sandhya. And I just realized I'm wearing the same shirt as I am on the poster. So I feel like I just jumped out of the poster and came to life for this webinar. But thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Thank you everyone for being here tonight. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, folks, I'm a little nervous, I'm not gonna lie. So I just want to say that. And, thank you so much for being here. And I just want to start off by saying, like, it's a really tough time right now for a lot of different reasons with the COVID-19 pandemic, with the recent events that happened in our own backyard, with the tragic murder of George Floyd. It's a lot of things are heavy on our hearts right now. And I am very grateful that I'm honored and humbled to be selected to be a guest speaker for tonight. Actually surprised. I was like, are you sure I'm qualified for this? We're like, yeah, I was like, okay, cool. So I'm happy to be here. And I'm very grateful to be here with you all and for you all to join us tonight. So thank you so much. And, in my formal introduction, I sound so, just out there. I just want to remind you all that I'm still a person. I'm a quirky college student. I do all the things, I spend time with my friends and family. I love cooking. I love baking. I'm still just a regular person. And, and why I want to acknowledge that is that because I make mistakes too, and tonight, with the topic of allyship and how we can support the Black Lives Matter movement as non-Black folks and non-Black POC. This is me as an opportunity to share my lived experiences, to talk about what I've done and how I have shown support, but at the same time, I'm still human. I make mistakes. I want to acknowledge that first as well, and that I'm not perfect. And I'm just sharing my own experiences, and that I'm here to learn and grow, just like you are here today. But when Sandia told me like, oh, the first 15 minutes is yours, I was like, my gosh, that's a lot of time. And I was like, what am I supposed to talk about, you know? And I was like writing, and I was like staying up late. I was like, I have to cover everything. And, you know, and the thing I want to emphasize the most is like, I can't cover everything, you know, like I can't cover everything. There's so much to cover. And really, there's no guide or booklet to allyship and how to support the Black Lives Matter movement. I can just share from my own experiences. But the thing that I want to say first out of everything is just like we're all at different places in our journeys as allies and like supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. And the first thing I want to say is just like education is the most important thing that I can emphasize first. You know, like we can't support the Black Lives Matter movement. We can't support and be fully, you know, fighting for justice and fighting for racial justice specifically for our Black community if we don't understand ourselves what is our part in all this, you know. And and you know, you can do all the things that you're supposed to do, you know, at like or in the sense, or like things that you see other people like doing supply runs for underrepresented communities, and you can be posting on social media, you can be doing all these things, but if you're not sitting down and really looking inward and reflecting on your life experiences and how racism has shaped you and how you have maybe perpetuated anti-Blackness or racism in your own life, you really can't you really can't further that work if you don't look into yourself and understand the why. Like, why are we doing this, you know? And the second part I want to say with that is just like I refrain from saying like you know, like not important. You know, and tonight, like the topic is allyship and how we're supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. But I want to refrain from calling myself an ally because that's not something that you call yourself. You know, it's not a position, it's not a title. You don't get to decide if you're an ally to a community. The community you're an ally to decides if you're an ally or not. And I think that's something really important to remind ourselves. And, you know, and like I said, it's not a position, it's not a title. It's really how you show up in spaces, how you're advocating, how you're giving space to Black voices and amplifying Black voices is what it means to be an ally, you know? So I refrain from using that term just because that's not my place to call myself an ally. Is really, it depends on how, you know, am I really showing up? Am I supporting? Am I, you know, walking the walk, or am I just talking the talk, you know? And you know, so I refrain from using that. So I just want to say that, and like I will gladly tell you how you can support the Black Lives Matter movement as non-Black folks in POC, you know. And back to the education part, you know, you have to start with yourself. And I'm really lucky that, you know, in these past couple years, if you asked me 4 years ago to be a guest speaker for this event, I would not say yes. And not because I don't support, that's not at all. But I didn't have the tools, I didn't have the resources, I didn't have the information to speak on these topics, you know. And I'm really lucky that in these past 3-4 years, I've been you know, I'm at Hamlin, and I've had the opportunity to have not only conversations but dialogues on race, because I think that's really important to do, you know, and like really be in a safe environment to talk about race and how that's impacted you, and really like I said earlier, really reflecting on how what your part is in this world, and how the things that we've learned in our lives and how do we unlearn them. Because allyship is not, you know, a title, a position, it's a lifelong journey, folks. You know, it's a lifelong journey of learning and unlearning all the things that we were either taught, you know, in our schools or in different spaces about, you know, communities of color, especially the Black community, unlearning like things that were taught to us that perpetuated racism, that perpetuated white supremacy, that perpetuated anti-Blackness. And then at the same time, while you're unlearning that, learning other parts. So, you know, like learning like what is our part in this? why are we doing this? Why are these systems built the way they are? You know, and like why, and really looking at like, why is it that the criminal justice system is overrepresented by Black and brown people, but then the decision makers, the policy, you know, the politicians and the legislators are severely underrepresented by communities of color. That's not a coincidence, folks. You know, there's a reason why that exists, you know, and like really, you know, like having those conversations to understand why these systems are built the way they are and actively dismantling them, you know, in your own work, in your own life, and empowering other people to, you know, to look inward and dismantle these systems together, you know. And you know, that's where you should start, you know, and like from there, you know, it's a lifelong journey. No one's perfect. You continue to learn to grow. I continue to learn to grow every day. I make mistakes, you know, like just because I've done this for a couple of years doesn't mean that I'm like perfect by any means. That's not, you know, it's a process and you learn and grow, you know. And but that's where you should always start, is education, especially educating yourself. And the other part that I really want to talk about today is that majority of my work is political engagement, you know, and in these last few weeks, in the wake of in the murder of George Floyd, it was the largest civil rights uprising in history, and there's a reason for that, you know. And you know, and I don't want to discredit any organizers or anyone in the past who's done the work, because there's been people who have been doing the work for a long time. But I think the difference between what happened in the last couple of weeks, it might have been because it was in our own backyard, but I think the reason why it was different is because youth led it, you know, like Black, Indigenous, youth of color organized, led, and really either were on the front lines fighting for justice or behind the scenes doing the work, you know. And it really shows in these last couple weeks that when you invest in the leadership of youth, when you don't underestimate our potential, and you know, value our opinions and what we can bring to the table, what happens? History was made. You know, things have been changed. We still have a long way to go, absolutely. But it shows that when you invest in youth, youth are the ones who are organizing it. And that's why it's been such a difficult time for a number of reasons for, you know, our Black community, Indigenous community, communities of color, and so on. But I have a lot of hope as well for the future, because I see all the youth out there that are doing the organizing work now, and I know that they're only gonna, it's only, you know, it goes up from here. They're gonna continue doing that work. They're continue fighting that fight. And that brings me a lot of hope, you know. But and you know, and in these last couple of weeks, you know, it shows that like we need to be investing in our youth, and not only should we reinvesting in our youth, we should be reinvesting in people that reinvest in us. Because like I said earlier, when you have a criminal justice system that's overrepresented by Black and brown community members, but then the policymakers, the ones in those rooms with the power to create systemic change, isn't representative of the community, well, there you go. That's a problem right there. And like, as much as organizing that we can do on the ground, and you know, as much as we can do, you know, in our, you know, on the ground and the political activism, not real change, but systemic change can't happen unless we dismantle the policies that shape our lives, you know. Because some people say, you know, like they don't want to get political. It's just, you know, very almost like a hobby to them, when in reality, for communities of color, it's our livelihood, you know. When these policy decisions are being made, and you know, it's affecting us personally, it's affecting our neighbors, it's not a hobby, it's not a job, it's our life, it's our life. We need to make sure that there's people in there that really fight for us, and they're creating policies for us, you know. So if we really want systemic change, and we really want to support the Black Lives Matter movement, we need to bring the energy from this movement, from these past couple weeks, and carry it to the polls, you know, and vote for people who will vote for us, who will fight for us, you know. And it's so incredible seeing. Recently, I saw an article that says over, I think, 40 Black women are running for office in Minnesota, which is record breaking. And that's astounding. That's so great. I hope each one of them get elected, and that's what we need. We need more Black, Indigenous folks of color to be running for office, and not only running, but getting elected, because we're the ones who will create the change. Because, we've been trying to do it for years. They're not doing it. So we need to get in there and do it ourselves, because no one else is going to. So when we talk about systemic change, we talk about really creating lasting change, especially not even for now, but for our future generations. It has to be political. It has to be in the polls. It has to be voting. It has to be casting that ballot. And it has to be not only, simply casting that ballot, but pushing for supporting candidates to run, and holistically investing in their leadership. And when I say underrepresentation is a huge problem, it's in our own backyard too. It's not even at the national level. For instance, for Minnesota in this last legislative session 2020, out of 201 state legislators at the Capitol, only 21 identified as Black, Indigenous, and folks of color. That's 10%, and out of those 21, only 11 identify as Black, Indigenous, and women of color. And and when people say we don't understand why these issues exist, I was like, well, look at the representation. That makes, that solves it all. I don't know how we're not talking about this more. I'm sitting here looking at these numbers oh my gosh, is no one looking at this? And then I was like, but it's not that time anymore. It's not the time for us to be silently voting for folks of color, or silently supporting it. It's time for us to be actively and loudly supporting Black voices, amplifying Black voices, and getting Black, Indigenous, and folks of color into office. So that's really that's my introduction. I could go on and talk about a little bit more, but I think that's in my work especially, that's what we need to do, is educating, understanding that we have a long ways to go, and that we need, and not having the vulnerability and the courage and the humility to have those discussions and to have those dialogues, and to acknowledge that we're not perfect and we're here to learn. It's about education, educating ourselves, educating our families, educating our friends, and taking time to educate community members, and actively dismantle the beliefs that we grew up to learn, and how can we dismantle these systems together. And thirdly, carrying this energy to the polls and casting those ballots, and getting accurate representation, because until we get accurate representation, these systems will never be dismantled.
Thank you so much, Yu, for your thoughts on how we can create change and become better allies of the Black community. If you have any questions for Yu, please ask in the Google form link posted in the chat, and we'll ask those in the question and answer session at the end of our program. Also, please consider donating to Women for Political Change, which invests in young people and creating alternative spaces for community education and healing, and challenges these systems of oppression and shifts the face of power within public and political leadership. Our next esteemed guest speaker is Jala Kurundi. Jala was born in Nairobi, Kenya, and moved to the United States when she was only 18 months old. She is the youngest of 5 children and a rising senior at the University of Minnesota Carlson School of Management, majoring in finance and marketing with minors in leadership and business law. She is currently interning at Microsoft in the finance department, and a fun fact about her is that she doesn't use an alarm clock to wake up. Jael is passionate about creating a better world for future generations. She served as the first Black undergraduate student body president at the University of Minnesota, and currently serves as the ranking representative to the Board of Regents. She is passionate about racial justice and ensuring that our institutions are held accountable. As a representative of students, Jael called for her university to sever ties after the murder of George Floyd, happening less than 20 minutes from the Twin Cities campus. The university holds values in diversity and inclusion, and those values do not align with the murderous actions and history of the Minneapolis Police Department. Students needed to know that the university valued Black lives today, not tomorrow. Everyone, here is Jala Kurundi.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here and speak with you all. And I'm truly humbled by this opportunity. And I just want to start by echoing some of the sentiments about this journey of allyship, of this journey of support doesn't start today and end in a month, right? You're not going to get it in a few weeks. It's not going to happen a year, but it's going to be an uncomfortable journey. As any person starts to uncover truths or starts to uncover that their norms are different than what they've assumed, it's going to be a difficult journey, right? And what you've learned or what you become accustomed to really starts to shift quite quickly as you learn, which is why education tends to be the first step that people take and should take, is understanding what these systems are. And I kind of like to look at it as this understanding of a cycle of systems. And so you look at the housing, for example, and you can go back to Roosevelt's New Deal when we had redlining and what that did in terms of separating communities of color and specifically Black communities, something we saw right here in St. Paul in the Rondo neighborhood. Or you can look at how that then affects where people live and the access that they had to healthcare, the access that they had to good schools, and what that did for that community in general. And when you start there, you start to see how the system itself perpetuated it towards racism and how that continued to fester. And what a lot of people say is like, well, we took away slavery and we integrated schools and we did this and we did that. Why are we still dealing with these issues? And that's because racism never went away. It just changed forms, right? We never eliminated racism. People became creative, or our systems became very creative in how they could implement it. You can still go back to housing deeds and see some of the white-only statements that were in there. Or you can go back and talk to lenders about how they weren't allowed to give loans to Black people of a certain grade because they were afraid they wouldn't pay them back. Or how neighborhoods had to be segregated because otherwise the value on that home would go down. And so when you're looking at these different factors, this racism is perpetuated, and it's not necessarily just this idea of overt racism, or I've shouted a word at you, or I've said something to you that's offensive. It's systemic, right? It's rooted in everything in how we operate, which is when you begin to realize what part of the system you play into. And I think that truth right there is what truly ends up either moving a person towards action or having them shy away from that uncomfortability. What people like to say is, I'm not racist because I haven't said anything, right? I have Black friends, I don't feel this way. What they don't realize is passive racism is very active today, right? It's the people that see something happen and they don't say something. It's the people that aren't actively trying to make seats at this table and trying to change the narrative that we see. It's the people that we're seeing that often might hear something or might not be the first person to say something. Have you ever asked yourself why your classroom looks so homogenous, right? Have you ever asked why your professors year to year quite literally look very similar? Have you ever asked why it looks the way it looks, or questioned the systems of which we live in? And that's part of the work that I see of what we could call an ally, or somebody who supports the Black Lives Matter movement, is constantly questioning and looking and being critical of the systems in which we operate in. And specifically within education, of which I've had the most experience in, it's looking at things like, why are Black students have a less likely opportunity or less likely probability to graduate than their white peers at the same institution receiving the same exact education? Why do they graduate with more loans than their white peers? Why do we see, especially in K through 12 classrooms, that the Black students are often the ones getting in trouble and are suspended at rates much higher than their younger white peers? Why are we seeing that? When police officers were brought into classrooms, that Black and brown students were arrested at higher the times rate, and seeing all these different things happen that were really harmful to Black students that then perpetuates through the system and creates what we see now in our world. And so what I see as what allies can do, or people that support the Black Lives Matter, is one, call out these things, understand that these things exist, accept them for what they are, because to me, there isn't really an argument when we have so much fact to back some of these things that have been going on. Racism is no longer this idea that people believe exists in some sort of in the air, in the world. It's something that we can come back to, and I can draw numbers to, I can draw history to, I can draw trend to what has been going on. And it's no longer okay. And allyship does not end at simply the hashtag or what you post on social media or putting the black square or opting out of purchasing on a certain day of the year. Allyship is this continuous work that you do day in and day out of making sure you're creating that space for a Black person or a person of color, Indigenous folk, to make sure that they are receiving the opportunities that are not afforded to them based on our systems. And what that looks like is making sure that, for example, in a corporate setting, looking around the table, who isn't there? Who do you call to the table? Who do you empower to give a voice? How do you look at the promotion and tenure that is going on and making sure something happened? For me, it was always frustrating to be at a university in which I felt as if the Black voice wasn't centered, or the needs of these students were not necessarily being perpetuated or being entered into what we needed to see for our students. It was frustrating to see that Black students were constantly asking for more resources, were constantly having these needs, and they didn't feel like they were being heard or recognized, in which I say we have to hold our institutions accountable. If you are in a position of leadership and you have the privilege to hold a title, use that power to ensure that you are fighting on behalf of every student, that you're making sure that all students at your institutions, especially predominantly white institutions, are getting the resources that they need. Because when I look at it, at the end of the day, when we're looking at it from an aspect of humanity, or looking at a person, I'm a human and you're a human, and you look at something that doesn't feel, when you bring it down and you bring it down to what it feels like, Angela Rice said something that's so important. And she said, you know, America promises these 3 liberties of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and we're still stuck on life. And when you look at it, that people are fighting for their exact existence and their mere livelihood, you can begin to realize why these problems are why this is such a problematic issue, why we have to fight for this right now, why we can no longer wait, and why this movement must continue. And I really do want to acknowledge that this did not start with us, right? This has been stuff people have been fighting for years, policies people have been asking for years. But it is our job to continue this work. It is our job to uplift this work, and this work must be everyone. It cannot just be the Black community. It cannot just be people of color. It has to be everyone. We all must be fighting for these policies and looking for a more equitable world, because at the end of the day, this is for our mere livelihoods. And who are we to decide who decides life? So I truly believe as we are allies and we are working on these matters, as a Black person, what I want to see from anyone who wants to be a supporter, anyone wants to be an ally, is educate yourself, but then have action steps for yourself. Be willing to engage in protest, be willing to go and fund mutual aid networks, be willing to show up. But it's not a title, like she said, it's not something that you wear as a banner. That's not something you choose to acknowledge, but your work is to center that voice and to continue to do that. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Jael, for such an informative and inspiring talk. I know I learned a lot. If you have any questions for her or you, please use the link in the chat to ask them. Please consider donating to Can't Forget the Kids, an organization started by a Carlson alum to provide K-12 youth in the Twin Cities with art supplies, because art is therapy. The link to donate to this group is going to be sent in the chat as well. Our next segment will be a panel-style question-answer session using the questions sent through the Google Forms to ask the speakers. Speakers, are you ready?
Yes.
Yes.
Our first question of the night is for you. What is a memorable moment on your ally journey that changed your view of allyship?
That's a great question. Wow. Shout out to whoever asked that question. You know, I think like a moment, I don't know if it would change my view of allyship, but in this last, in a couple of weeks ago, in the wake of the murder of George Floyd, I was angry, and, I was like, what can I do right now? What can I do to support the movement? I felt like my hands were tied. I was like, I can do more. What can I do more? And I posted something on my Instagram, very like simple, like, oh, I'm doing some supply runs. If you would like to donate and help me, like that would be greatly appreciated. If you don't have a car, and like I didn't think anything of it. It was like, oh, like maybe get a couple, like, couple $100, do some supply runs and help the community. I didn't think anything would really fester. And then 10 days later, almost $11,000 was raised that went back into the community. And I think that was really, I think in that moment, it wasn't the amount of money that was raised that was significant. It was the impact that we were able to make, we were able to buy like baby formula and diapers and hand them directly to mothers who were in need, and were just so happy just so happy and so grateful for the supplies that they needed. We were able to drop off food for families that were hungry because of the food deserts that were created, or that were already existing, I should say, in the Twin Cities, and were stretched very thin in these last couple of weeks. And in that was really impactful. And also it really showed the power of social media and how you can use that for social justice. I think was like the thing that I took away from it the most, because before that, like I would post here and there, but I really never thought of it as a tool for change. And then in these past couple of weeks, seeing all of the youth organizers and all the people leading and using that platform to create change and to amplify Black voices, I never thought of it as that way. But now I'm on it every day, 8 a.m. till 8 p.m., sharing things and, trying to educate other people, sharing resources, information. So that's been a really, just a remarkable experience that I had, showing the power of social media, and how it can create further social justice initiatives, and also how grassroots organizing has a huge impact on the community. And we don't need big partners, big corporations, big donations. We just need a whole lot of people who care, that can chip in a buck or two to create change. So yeah, thank you so much for that question. Such a great question.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Our next question is for both of you. How do you feel about the African American vernacular English being used by non-Black POC? Jael, do you want to start?
Wow, okay. This is how I've actually never gotten this question before. So from how I see it, I personally will call somebody out if I hear it being used. And there's specific words that have more offense than others that are used. And I think the reason it finds offense is, like anything sacred or important to a community, there's a reason it was created just for them. There's a reason that community chooses to engage in that way together. And that is their way to communicate with one another. That is their way to understand one another. Small things like, not even small, back when slaves used to braid their hair, right? And they used to sow seeds into their hair. There's a reason their hair was braided in such patterns, because it was a way to find their way, right? There's certain songs that were used to define each other or to let each other know messaging. There's reason and history behind the things that are said and the things that are done. So when someone coming in and using that doesn't necessarily understand that history or have ancestry in that way, it feels offensive to that community because of the reasons it was created and the reasons that exist. And so when people come, it's a violation to that community because of why it was created and how people find root in it and what it does for their identity, as well as finding that, again, that sacredness within the community. So for me, I would advise strongly anyone that is choosing to use this vernacular, choosing to speak in a certain way that is specific to a community, to be very careful of what they're doing and the offense that they create, and understand why this language is used and in what ways it is used.
For sure. And I just want to reiterate, ditto everything that Jael said, but this is a really good question. And and to be honest, I kind of like went back in my seat a little bit. I was like, I don't think this is the right, this is it's in the right place for me to answer this question. But as a non-Black POC, like Jael said, I just advise that if you hear folks using this language when it's not theirs, to call it out. And I would honestly go further and say call them in, because sometimes calling out folks can seem very like almost like, I don't know what the right word is, but sometimes calling people out can feel very isolating, can feel like they did some, and and what they did was wrong. But we don't want to isolate them and make them feel bad, because maybe they just didn't know that it was wrong. Because we're all at different stages um, in our allyship and how we are showing up in different spaces. Like we are all at different points in our learning and our education. So yeah, like Jael said, like the thing I want to reiterate for non-Black folks, non-Black POCs, that if you hear that language being used by folks who should not be using that language, call them in, educate them on why they shouldn't be using that language, and educate them coming from a place of love and respect, because that's when that's when they can look inward and be like, oh, acknowledge that they messed up, acknowledge that they weren't supposed to use that, so they can continue educating other people forward.
Thank you for that. Our next question is also for both the youth. How do we get the youth to vote when they don't like the candidates? How do we get the point across that a vote is not just for a president, but the cabinet, the Secretary of Education, etc.?
I'm going to wait for you because this is your wheelhouse. Go first.
I was like, oh man, I don't know if I want to take this one. Thank you, Jael. And that's a really valid question. I want to say that, and like, to be honest, if I'm going to be honest, I don't like the candidates either. Wasn't my first choice, but we have to do. It's not necessarily what we. It isn't our first choice, and I think I speak, as I'm saying that as my own personal views. I think a lot of people our age and a lot of people that I've associate myself with would agree. With in a perfect world, we would want a different candidate, but I think and the harsh reality of it is that like we can't choose. There will never be a perfect candidate, because the people we're electing are people. And people make mistakes. People have histories, and that's not invalidating or discrediting the mistakes that they've done. And like discrediting that, but remembering that it's not just voting for one position. It's a movement, and reiterating that. And the best example that I've heard other young people use is that like, you're not voting for necessarily a president, you're voting for the next Supreme Court justice. As Ruth Bader Ginsburg, almost messed her name up. She is a powerhouse, for us, and she fights for progressive change and like fights for social justice, is just a champion for our communities. But sadly, like, she can't be in that position forever as much as we want to. Like someday she'll have to leave that position. And other progressive Supreme Court justices might not be able to stay in their positions for long for a very number of reasons. And we need to think not only we need to think beyond ourselves and realize that our vote matters a lot. Each one of our vote matters. Each one of our vote counts, and each one of our vote will make history. But we need to also remember that like, it's not about us. It's about investing in people that will invest in us. And like, that's a really good question, because like, they're not our first choices. And in a perfect world, we want a different candidate, but in order to have progressive change, in order to not only have elected officials and appointed officials that will invest in us and like create change and fight for justice, we need to elect people that will appoint other folks. And if we elect Donald Trump again, that won't happen. Because people ask like, how do you know? Well, we've seen the last 4 years. Like, that's such a great example. I shouldn't say great. It's an example of what the next 4 years might look like, or will continue to be, if we don't elect progressive people. So I guess in short, I want to remind people of that this is not just about us. It's about all the communities that, we are supporting, and all the communities that rely on progressive change, that relies on this vote. And to remember, not only not think of it as the one person we're voting for, but think about all the people that could be elected and could be appointed, and all the change that can happen if we invest in this one person.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I really have to add on to that is that I want to remind people that yes, it is a presidential election year, and we're seeing a lot of positions at the federal level, but our state and local elections are so important. Our city council, right? These are the people that are making these decisions that we're seeing on a state to state basis. And these are the people that are making decisions that affect our daily lives, right? Your very existence on a day-to-day. So also, as you take your ballot to the polls for our presidential election, please do not forget about our primary happening, and don't forget about all the other state and local elections that are happening.
Thank you both. Yes, it's so important to get out there and vote. So please encourage others to vote as well. Our next question is for Jael. As the first Black student president at the University of Minnesota, what are some challenges you have faced with the predominantly white institution?
It's a great question. And I want to say, most of the challenges, or when my challenges began, was not when I became president. I think they started very early on at a predominantly white institution. Black students make up around 6.3, maybe less, maybe a little more, give or take, 6.3% of the student body population on the Twin Cities campus. So already from that population, we were quite few, and then specifically in our business school, even fewer. But what I want to say about some of the challenges I faced was immediate assumption or credibility, or lack thereof, honestly, that was given to me. Whether it was me walking into a room, whether it was me presenting ideas. I can remember having a meeting with our provost, and I remember walking into the building, and either an assistant or somebody asked me if I was lost, not knowing I was going to go meet with the provost. And it is those small microaggressions or those small assumptions that people made that was very frustrating. Another thing that was also very frustrating to me is people immediately assumed what I knew and what I didn't know, right? Whether it was my knowledge on financial operations of the university, whether it was my knowledge on our structure, on trajectory of the university, what we needed forward, or my ability to lead. There was always people that made their own assumption on what I knew and what I didn't know. And that was very frustrating. And then I think another part that was very hard is in matters where we're continuously discussing race or we're discussing experience, it wasn't just me objectively speaking about it, but it was a continuous personal experience, right? It was continuously relaying this message of what I was experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And what made that difficult is you have to bring it to a point in which you are still advocating, you're still able to communicate effectively, but you're constantly talking about your own experience. I'm constantly relaying to you how an instructor or professor was racist to me. I'm constantly telling you how the police make me uncomfortable. I'm constantly telling you what's been going on, but I'm still working on an advocacy basis. And that can become emotionally and very psychologically taxing when you constantly have to relay this experience on top of anything that you experience as being a woman and being a Black person. And so I think those challenges existed. And also, again, like you just mentioned, we're at a predominantly white institution, right? So majority of my constituents, or majority of the people I represent, are white students. And so when you come down and you're prioritizing, or you're making what you have to go and talk to administrators about, or what's been going on, you work on where you're hearing information from the students. And sometimes that loudest student was the majority. But it was important to me to always make sure that I heard from everyone and heard from the Black students that I felt had gone unheard for so long. And I remember coming into my presidency, it was a matter of our then president resigned, and I was vice president, immediately assumed. But my mom had always said, this is like Queen Esther, and I believe in the Bible and God. And like, you came into this position for a reason, right? Like, you are here for a reason. I think it's so important that we're put in places where we remember that we're there for a reason, right? This is not a happenstance. You did not get it by luck. You have worked hard, and you've put yourself in a place where you can be a leader, and you can strive, and you can work hard. And so I think those are some of the challenges I faced along the way. And in general, administrative opposition, right? Not everyone is in favor of everything I brought forward. Not everyone agrees. Not everybody thinks it's a good idea. And it was always a matter of balancing, how can I make sure to push this forward for students? What can I do to make sure that this advocacy initiative still goes forward? And at the end of the day, so many people forget that I was still a student too, right? So I was still managing a 19 credit semester load. I was still working 2 other jobs, and having to balance those 2 priorities in all was difficult, right? Because you still want to be successful in your academics and in your professional career as well.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is for both of you. Being woke all the time can be very tolling and stressful for the BIPOC community, and that's even more heightened now. How do you take care of ourselves and sustain yourselves, especially when people are asking you and other BIPOC community members to educate people?
I can start. I really struggle with this one. One, because I have a passion for the work. So I do see the genuine ask of so many to say, I want to learn more. What can I do about this? But I also then say, to me, especially when I'm working with educators or people that are part of higher education, I always think, would you ever walk up to your professor and say, give me the answers to our homework assignment? Or would you ever go and do a research project and say, well, I'd really love if all the research could just be given to me and I'll just write the paper, right? There's never a time in which we are asked to do something or a task is given, and the same person we're asking to do that for on behalf of is also the person who gives us the answers. So I always say, in the same way we're so able to use so many resources at our fingertips and able to go and do a quick search on Google or use a database and look into this information, the literature and the media and so many different things and resources are so available to us that accessibility to these things is very, the accessibility barrier is very low for accessing many things. And I want to acknowledge that, yes, there's some things that aren't on audiobook where somebody could listen, or aren't in Braille where somebody could listen. But I always say there's a place or a way we can create these resources to be accessible, and they are. So I want people to take that extra step to go and find it for themselves. And so I definitely believe that it is an exhausting matter having to explain racism, especially when you go back and you have to explain it in a systemic manner. And you're not explaining that it's not just shouting a word at somebody or saying something offensive or explaining what a microaggression is. So I really do urge people to do their own research or listen to a podcast or do whatever they can do, because it is taxing and it's tiring, because it's not just a 20-minute conversation for that person. It's not just a 30-minute lecture. It's not just them explaining to you what's going on in a book. That's their life, right? That is their everyday. So once that conversation is over for you, that person still has to deal with the very life they've just described to you. So I really do urge people to take time and be thoughtful in what they ask of people of color, what they ask of Black people to explain their experience, because that is their experience. They don't get to take that off at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just want to echo everything that Jael said. And Jael, I wish we knew each other before this, because I feel like we right? And like I want to echo everything that you said. Absolutely. In the age where technology is just at our fingertips, there's no reason to be ignorant. There's no reason. There's no explanation to not understand. And and like I said, and we've said before, we're all in different stages in our education and how we're showing up and supporting each other, but at the same time, and like we should show grace to others who are at different points, but at the same time, like you said, they should be doing the research themselves too. So as as a person of color, I've gotten a lot of different I shouldn't say requests, then it feels like a business, but like I've gotten a lot of like DMs, a lot of messages, a lot of comments from people saying that they want to do more. They want to learn more. They want to do more. How can I help? Like, what can you give me some resources? And at that point, like Jael said, like, refer them to Google, and like refer them to like books that they can read, and refer to articles that they can read, and refer to podcasts they can listen to, because that's very easy. You're still doing the work. Please don't feel like you're any less of a supporter of the movement just because you referred them to something else and you're not doing the work yourself. If people didn't want them to listen to the podcast, you wouldn't record them. So there's always resources out there. You can always refer them to other places to get that information, so that you're not um, putting your own mental, emotional, social, and like physical health on the line to continue this movement. And the other thing I want to iterate is that, like, take care of yourself. Like, I'm not really good at this either, so I'm feeling like a hypocrite. But a couple weeks ago when I was doing the organizing work and everything, like, I got really exhausted, and like there would be points where I just needed to, like, just like I knew I needed to, like, slow down or just take a break, but I couldn't, because I felt like if no one else was doing this work, who's going to, like, who's going to continue it? And the best analogy I have is that, like, I used to be in choir, and I was in 6 years of choir. And and when you're in a choir and you're singing a song, and in a song you hold that last note, sometimes choirs can hold it for a very long time, minutes, right? And people ask me, you're like, oh my gosh, how do all of you hold that note at the same for that long? Like, you must have like lungs of like steel, and it's just like, you do realize that, like, we all drop out at certain points, right? Yes. And that's how you should be doing this kind of work. You should, when you're doing the work and you feel like the people alongside you are losing air, or losing energy, need a break, you take an extra breath so that they can take a break, right. So that the note can be carried on, the work can be carried on, the movement can continue. And like, that's and like, for people who were in choir or not, I think that's a really good analogy, because like, there's always work to be done, really, but you can't be doing it all the time constantly, because you're going to burn yourselves out, and that's not going to help anybody. So when you feel like you need to take a break, lean on each other, so that they can take an extra breath so you can take a break. And when they need that extra breath, you can step in and help them. And the last thing I want to say is that, like, there's always going to be people, and who, let's face it, on our Facebook pages, who say things are very problematic, and like, you see that, and something like, my first instinct as a non-Black POC is always address it, because I'm just like, I don't want a Black individual, Black person, to see this comment first and have to address it, because like, it's not, they, like, the Black community's had enough. They've, it shouldn't be always their responsibility to address those kind of problematic and racist and discriminatory comments. Then I jump on. But at the same time, like, there's a moment when you call it quits, like Jael said, like, it's not a 30-minute conversation, it's not a 2-hour long conversation. Like, some of these people will always have those beliefs, and you just need to, like, realize that, like, okay, like, I just need to say thank you for your time and step away. And a couple weeks ago, I refused to call it quits and had a 4-hour long conversation with someone that went nowhere. Like, like, it did not go anywhere. Like, and I tried so hard, but like, and was it 4 hours a waste of time? I don't think it was, because I learned that, like, sometimes you just need to, step away and take care of yourselves.
And quickly to add on to that, I think what you just mentioned about being the person to fight before somebody else, somebody Black or somebody Hispanic has to fight for themselves. But in that, also understand where your energy is well spent. I truly believe murder is nonpartisan. I don't know why we're arguing about the murder of a Black man. I truly do not think that should be a partisan or political issue. So know when somebody's trying to argue that in a partisan or political manner, that at the end of the day, a video with audio clearly depicts a man being murdered. We should not be arguing. That is not where your energy is well spent on trying to explain to somebody why that was problematic, or why that was race inherent, or trying to bring somebody back to, this is why this is a problem. What you can tell somebody is the American policing system is inherently racist in how it was founded and born, right? That's what you can tell someone, rather than having to sit there and debate about whether or not that murder was race invigorated, or whether or not that murder was defended and needs to be somehow justified, because you can't justify that, right? So I think really on that part, energy, but really know where your energy should be well spent.
Absolutely.
Our next question is for both of you. How do you feel about the burden put on all the BIPOC individuals to educate our white counterparts and always be the one to tell them how to be an ally and how we can prevent the conversation from drifting away?
I think conversations like this, right? Because we have to get to a place where we aren't a part of the conversation and you're talking with your family about everything I've said here. We have to get to a place in which you have so much education where we no longer necessarily need to have a Black person in the room for Black people to be defended, right? So as we constantly are going through these motions, and which is why I say there's TED Talks, there are conversations you can watch. There's so much out there in which you can slowly learn these mannerisms of how to hold these conversations or have these conversations, but that's where we need to be. And at that point, we will get to a place in which we can say, now you can have this conversation on your own and you can hold this by yourself so that we cannot necessarily place that burden. And right now that burden is there because that experience is there and we are the people that can speak to it. And people have not done their due diligence in terms of researching and understanding this experience. And like has been said, that doesn't deserve a badge of honor. It should rather be something that you feel is like your obligatory duty, right? As we are all supporters of different communities and identities we don't hold, it is our job to understand that or empathize, really, truly, you can't understand, but empathize or do your best to somehow catch an ounce of that experience so that you can replicate or be able to represent that. To me, sometimes what I want to see is the snowball effect. I want to see you tell your parents to then tell your grandparents who will then tell their friends and so on and so forth. So these conversations aren't necessarily a teaching moment for everybody, but a discussion. It should become a dialogue. It should no longer feel like a lecture to somebody because they've also understood and taken time to understand these matters as well. And this is sustaining this movement is something I struggle with because to me, it's never died, right? People have chosen to suppress it. People have chosen to ignore it. People have chosen not to listen to the leaders and the many advocates and activists that have worked for so many years. To me right now is this societal awakeness or the societal consciousness that's happening, which is the reason why we feel like we need to sustain the movement. The movement never went away. People have never stopped, but it is our job to continue to advocate and be activists and continue this movement in terms of what's happening on social media and what's happening with societal consciousness as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and everything that Jael said, I just want to echo that and also add, because I know we have 1 minute left and I want to keep it short. You know, and I and everything that she said, and also it's a privilege to learn about racism rather than experience it yourself. And I think, and I truly believe that there's a lot of specifically white folks out there who, you know, want to fight, who want to be allies, who want to understand, who want to have these conversations. But like Jael said, if they've never experienced it themselves, how can they talk about it? You know, and I feel like a big reason why a lot of the work is put on BIPOC folks is because of fear. Like they're scared to have these dialogues. They're scared to, you know, be vulnerable because they don't want to say something wrong. You know, they don't want to, you know, they don't want to misspeak. They don't want to, you know, relay the wrong information. So they're relying on us because we're the ones who experience it. You know, we're the ones who quote unquote are the experts in, you know, because of our lived experiences. So, and like Jael said, it starts with these conversations, it starts with these dialogues, because, you know, at first, like they, you know, like I hope, you know, they might listen in and like hear folks talking about it and like be like, and it comes from that education point, right, of like educating themselves on, okay, this is, you know, like learning about all the aspects to racial injustice and then understanding their place in the system. And once they understand their place and recognize their privilege, then it comes to the point, it's like, okay, I'm ready to have these dialogues. I don't need to, you know, not that they don't need to listen, but like, you know, I understand, I have somewhat of an understanding that I really want to have these dialogues with people, you know, and like, you know, like have these like, you know, heartfelt conversations to reach a certain point. So, you know, we're doing the hard work now, but I really hope that like in the future, after, you know, today and after these conversations have been held by BIPOC folks, that they can bring that knowledge back to their families and their friends and continue that fight inside their own home. So that's where most places start, right? You can't, you know, you can't fight for a movement if you're not addressing it in your own self and your own family and your own circles.
Right.
Thank you both so much. We have reached the end of our session. Thank you for all of your questions. Sorry if we weren't able to get to yours. We would like to end tonight with some thank yous and a call to action. To start, we would like to thank everyone in IAM, the Sorry Youth Group, and We Charity MN who helped us organize the event. Next, and most importantly, we would like to thank our esteemed speakers, You Do, and Jala Kurundi, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to educate us on such a vital topic. Last but definitely not least, we would like to thank all of you for attending this event. We really hope you are able to take away something from this session. Be on the lookout for an email with links to resources on how you can stay educated and be an ally, as well as links to the recordings of each of these sessions. The Twin Cities Nonviolent Organization is also having an essay competition regarding racial injustice for high school students. So if you're interested, please check out the link in the chat. We will also be sending out a post-event survey so that we can get feedback on this event. So please do fill that out as well. With that said, thank you everyone once again, and have a great rest of your night.